I assume all of you should be new, and they asked me to redo from the beginning. So, how many of you are like completely new here? Some brightness issues, my laptop. Just give me a moment. So on the chat box, just type how many of you are completely new. So there are 17 people. Of that, one is my account and one is the IR's account. So there should be 15 of you students. So in the chat box, just type that you're completely like new, like fresh. New na type பண்ணுங்க இல்ல already old batch na old batch type பண்ணுங்க. And if you're old, if you're one of the old students, let me just look at the names of the participants. None of your names are very familiar. I think you're all Trichy batch, right? So, okay. Yes, they told me you're Trichy batch. So, what I want to understand is what is the topic that you want me to take? Because you're an old batch, I assume you would have already taken one attempt. So, what is the topic that you're looking forward to me to take? By then, my computer has some screen setting issues. I'll just stop that and come back. I'm not going to leave the meeting. I'm going to be present. So, on the chat box, I want you to type down what is the topic, like principles of design, building material, history of architecture or famous architects. So you brush through these topics, no? So I want you to type which architects and their books are. Architects and their works books. Okay, so all of you give me your opinion. We'll take a common and then that topic we'll do for today. I think we have 4 to 5 classes, so we'll try to cover up. So just give me your opinion of which topic you want. Now my screen is better. Okay. They're asking books and their authors. I'm surprised because I wasn't aware. Let's see. I can do architects and their works if you want, because architects like mandatory 2 questions in architects for theme. And also your IR book has a big 4 to 5 pages architects documentary. You mean architects and their works or a documentary, right? I assume like Lee Corbusier, B.V. Doshi, Charles Correa. Either based on other questions. Are you guys asking on that aspect? Quick. Okay, I will type down the topics and you guys try to tell me if that's what you're looking for. So every time we do architecture, terminologies is one. Second is we do architects and their famous works is second. Third is we do elements of design. Elements of design. Then we do fourth is principles of design, which is a common question again and again. Like I think you have 4 to 5 questions on that principles of design. Then theory in design. Fifth one is theory in design. Then we do climatology. Then we do foundation types. Then we have a brief on yes, so building Shalini has sent me a direct message, building components and terms. That is basically terminologies. 8th one is let me finish, guys, then you come back and tell me. 8th one, because I might lose track. Foundation types, we do building construction, just few terms involved in building construction. Then we do 9 is building materials. Then 10 is and color theory, which is again very important. I'm sending everything to Shalini. This is what happens when you guys send me a message in the middle. Okay, 10 is after building materials, we do history of architecture. Then we do color theory, which is very important. Constant question. Then we do orthographic projections. Okay, so this is the 12 major topics, and we also have some subsidiary topics like anthropometry and ergonomics, which is okay to skip. In our question, in the 3 attempts. So, which is the topic that you in the 10, I've typed 12 topics, no? So, in these 12, 17 of you who are there, tell me what is the one that you guys want. So, இன்னைக்கு எது நிறைய கேக்குறீங்களோ அதை பேஸ் பண்ணி we'll slowly start covering up the topics. Okay. Yes, guys, fast with 4. This 4 principles of design. Okay, 4 and 6. So a lot of people are saying 4 and 6. Design climatology. 4. Okay, then 11 color theory. Okay, then 4. So most of you, so I assume so we do principles of design today. We'll also do basics of elements of design to understand principles of design. So we'll cover 3 and 4 first today. The others, so that I know what to take for tomorrow. Quickly, guys. You open up documents. Seven and 9. So what is 7 and 9? Foundation types and building materials. Yes, we'll do 7 and 9 as well. So 4 வந்து இன்னைக்கு நிறைய பேர் கேட்டிருக்கிறதுனால we'll start with 4. Taking out the just give me 2 minutes. I have to open the Okay, guys, we're going to be starting with 3 and 4 today because you have to understand elements of design to understand principles of design. So in principles of design, we will be covering up 8 topics. And then apart from that, we are going to cover up 4 topics in elements of design. So in the elements, in the tools, these principles are formed. So what are these elements and what are these principles? So at this level of NATA, it is very difficult to understand these concepts before even designing. Being exposed to design, you are going to understand the concepts like a lot of architects use as their styles of designing methods. So to design, first one, how do you start a design? How do you do anything on a paper? Like simple things like do a sketch of the room or do a sketch of the cupboard, how do you guys basically start? Is where elements of design comes into play. Okay. So what are the elements of design that we're going to be seeing is point, line, plane, and volume. Okay. Anything starts with a point. Basics of anything starts with a point. A point is a reference to create something larger. So the point doesn't always necessarily have to be a dot. Point will change its value based on the context of where we are using it. A column becomes a point, a statue becomes a point, a structure becomes a point. So a point changes its content, changes its value based on context and based on its importance. That's the secondary reason. So if on the just looking at it in plain terms of designing language, so point, line, plane. These three are 2D elements. A volume is a three diagrammatical element. So point, line, and plane will have one reference. Line and plane will have two references, X and Y. So volume is X, Y, and Z. Third coordinate comes into play. First is point. 2 points join panna, you get a line in any angle. Line வந்து close panna in any direction becomes a plane. So plane when composed together gives a volume. That's how it develops. Point to line to plane to volume. So in the basis of actually the way these are repeated, the way these are composed, we get the idea of principles of design. So the image that they give you in NATA is basically a compositional image of these points, lines, planar elements together. Shapes are under, they play in different forms, two diagrammatically or three diagrammatically, and ask you to identify what is the principle, what is the method of composing. Basically, அதுதான் நீங்க வந்து examples பார்த்திருப்பீங்க like symmetry, axis, focal point, flow, intricacy, then what else is there? Scale, hierarchy, contrast, இந்த மாதிரி terms வந்து கொடுப்பாங்க for you to identify. The problem here in the question paper is they ask you to identify exactly the 4 correct design elements. So by luck or by understanding, mostly most of us get 2 to 3 correct. It's just the last 2 or the last one which is always a bit confusing. Whether you will go in for a contrast or whether you will say it as a positive and negative, all that is purely based on luck. So the way you should approach is basically you should have a clear understanding of how the composition is done with using simple tools like point, line, plane, and volume. So first you have to understand is a 2 diagrammatic composition or a 3 diagrammatic composition. Okay. So other base funny again principles will vary. I'm going to open the presentation. Give me a minute because I'm not supposed to have to call up RP. I hope you're all there. So we're going to be starting with elements of design. So like I mentioned, point, line, plane, volume. So a point indicates a position A. A point extended becomes a line with properties of length, direction, and position. A line extended becomes a plane with properties of length, width, shape, surface, orientation, and position. A plane extended becomes a volume. So basically we call a plane extrusion. So either you extrude a triangle or you extrude a circle. Circle becomes a cylinder. You extrude a triangle, then you extrude a rectangle, it becomes a cuboid. You extrude a square, it becomes a cube. A plane extended becomes a volume with properties of length, width, and depth, form and space, surface, orientation, and position. A point A marks a position in space. Conceptually, it has no length, width, or depth, and is therefore static, centralized, and directionless. So if you look at all these points, let's just look at my cursor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All this sort of gives you a very static visual feel, right? So in the point, in this course of doing elements of design and principles of design, we are going to be mostly dealing with the visual design aspect. So we are going to be talking about graphical design more. How we translate this to real architecture is a separate topic by itself. So what we are covering now is mainly about the visual graphical design sense. So that's why, because if in the topic in the three diagrams the dot, the point is very static, okay? Whereas in the last 1, 2, 3, you will not sense the feel of staticness. Yes or no? You feel a little visually you're feeling different about these three. Yes or no? Put it on the chat box. What is making you feel different when you're comparing this and this? I want to hear from you guys. Shows depth. Really? Okay. To a sense, it sort of shows depth. Then balance. No. Okay. Balance we'll be discussing. Balance is two type இருக்கு. Symmetry and asymmetry. So what sort of balance is it showing you? நீங்க வந்து ரொம்ப என்ன kind of இதெல்லாம் போவேனா how is it visually feeling to you? So இது வந்து the first in the three images is static. But in the three images you don't feel the staticness. So tell me, do you feel it static or you don't feel it static? Yes or no? I want to hear a yes or a no. Do you find it static or you don't find it static? So in the static, in the lame are again terms that is coming in principles of design. So just note down all this and be see. It's not like your school classes where I'll be telling you static na explanation is this is the meaning, mug up and but design doesn't work that way. You have to be very it's a very intuitive concept that we come by the way of from the way of discussions. So a lot of things I'll be covering up as a discussion process. Okay, so the term that we're talking is static here. Yes, guys. So in the last three images, are you feeling the point to be static? Yes or no? Tell me some answer. Yes. Yes or no? Am I audible? Am I clear? Okay, let me explain to you guys. So, இப்போ இதுல வந்து ஸ்டாட்டிக்கா ஏன் ஃபீல் பண்றோம்? Now, I'll tell you, this is no static because they placed unwanted place. Okay, a very sweet reply, I can say. Yes, unwanted place in here he's saying or she is saying is because our mind is used to certain order. So இப்ப நம்ம ஸ்கொயர்னா நம்ம வந்து பாயிண்ட் எப்பயுமே எங்க வைப்போம்னா அந்த ரெண்டு diagonal கட் ஆகுற intersection or in the center. So our mind is tuned to a certain order. Whereas when you place the point in these three cases slightly off from the usual position where it is supposed to be placed, it is said to be the point is said to be in dynamic. That is, the point is said to be in movement. We call it as dynamic in nature. So it is not just up here. If you had placed it here or if you had placed it here, anywhere apart from where our mind is usually tuned to connect. As human beings in our everyday life, we are used to a certain order, certain routine. So our mind invariably maps the point to be in that location. That is called the static point. When the point goes a little off from where our mind is tuned to think, that is when it's called as dynamic in nature, or the point is said to be in movement. So we've covered three aspects of principles of design here. I'm being very particular because we're almost towards the end of the NATA course, and I think you all would have read through the basics. So that's why I'm saying, like very consciously putting forward the words of static, dynamic, movement. So understand these three design aspects, sense of design. So that's about how a point or a position based funny, how the difference is being created. Now coming to a point doesn't necessarily have to be just a dot. A dot extruded with certain circumference becomes a column. So a column is a case of a point element in the structure. Okay, a point has no dimension. To visibly mark a position in space or on the ground, a point must be projected vertically into a linear form as a column, obelisk, or tower. Obelisk is something like a column. I think obelisk was questioned one of the last or previous year's papers in some attempt. So obelisk one is again, have you noticed the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel statue in India, the Statue of Liberty? So on the Madri, the pedestal on which they are placed for us an obelisk, or obelisk separate away irkom. Sometimes the pedestals are referred that way. That is one case. Now coming to this case, so this is an urban plaza. So in the European context, in the Western countries concept, plazas are very common urban infrastructure element for people congregation. So in the particular point where there's a statue of Marcus Aurelius, it's in the center of the central plaza, and from there you see radiating lines coming out. So everything and the whole area is focused towards the central statue and is covered up by a series of buildings around. So on the urban plaza, what a central becomes, the statue becomes a central point element. So let's take other examples. So in your own cities, in Trichy or Madurai, wherever you guys are from, or Chennai, there's always main road junctions where you will see a round tana. You will see fountains, or you will see some statues which are highlighted in that particular main road context. So what happens? They become the point element for that particular zone of traffic. So how that on the point sutti a lot of traffic is regulated. For example, round tanas are a very good element of traffic regulation. Okay, so that's all. A point doesn't always necessarily have to be just a round dot, is what I'm trying to say through all this explanation. Now, we usually do an exercise. I'm going to give this to you. I want you to identify point elements in your house, like in the house that you're sitting right now. I want you to identify. I will give you an example, but I don't want the example to be repeated again. The fan in the ceiling is a point element. Okay. Similarly, I want you to identify other point elements that you can call as a point element. Doesn't necessarily have to be a round. I just use the case of a fan because we've been constantly using it as an example of point. So, இப்போ 4:05 time 4:10 I wanted to identify a lot of similar point elements in your house. So in case you finish your house, go on to your neighborhood level or in your city level or in a country level or outside country also. So Statue of Liberty and the examples that you can call how that acts as a point element. Okay, take 5 minutes, write it like write it on your book. Come back after 5 minutes and put it on the chat box at 4:10. I'm around. I'm not leaving the meeting, so I am still around. Guys, I didn't notice the time. So yes, are you guys done with exploring around your house? Point element. Quick to finish the elements of design and then move on to principles of design. Quick. Yes, are you around? யாருமே வந்து போட மாட்டீங்க video போட மாட்டீங்க. I feel like I'm just talking to the computer if there is something coming up on the chat box. Yes, Aris Raj, Shalini, Harita, Rahul, Karthika, Mohammed, Yashwant, Kili, Valavan, Divya Darshini, Vaishali, where are you all living? Gracelyn, Priyadarshini. So Priyadarshini and the pair different people or same people, I don't know. Okay, guys, please, can I see point elements? Yeah, guys, I'm going to put it up, then let me just proceed to line. Wheel. Yes. Wheel is a form because you're connecting to it because the circle doesn't necessarily have to be a circle, but it's okay. Wheel can be considered as a point element. Then the other options. Guys, I gave you and send your messages has to go to everyone and not just to me. Clock. Good one, Rahul. Clock is a point element in the wall, you can call it as. Also, when you're trying to identify elements, don't always go in for a circular ones. Okay, try the other ones also. The others, 5, like more than 5 minutes, you will identify. Okay, we'll stop with this. We'll go to line. Okay. Share. Now line. So 2 points connected together in whatever direction you are having 2 points, you will draw a line to connect them. So it can be simple things that we've learned in our primary classes about a sleeping line, standing line, and planting line. So I have a 3-year-old son and I have a tutor coming home for him, and she always does this exercise. I think I've been repeating this through all my classes. So what she does is simple exercises that she gives him. She keeps 2 points for sleeping line, or 2, 1 bottom, 1 on top for standing line, and 2 like this for connecting the slanting line. So basically she'll ask him to connect the points to understand the difference of a sleeping line, standing line, and slanting line by the idea of connecting the points. So like how we spoke about a static and static dynamic experience. So line is one, it can be a very thin line, it can be dotted line, it can be a very thick line. A line that doesn't necessarily have to be like that. You can have different shapes making up a line. So a line will have an X and a Y point. It will have a certain directionality. It can serve to join, link, support, surround, or intersect other visual elements. Describes the edges of and give shapes to the plane. Articulates the surface of the line. The character of a line is determined by our perception of its length to width ratio, its contour, and its degree of continuity. So the way it is forming, the way it is closing, and which direction it goes, we give it certain geometrical forms as planar elements that we'll be seeing in the next one. So this is not a square. This is where the line is just leading to. This is again like a triangle, but when they're closed, another we will call it as a triangle. This is a circle. Again, it needs to be closed to call it as a circle. Now coming to again the same static and dynamic in line. So normally we all know that we have a vertical line and we have a horizontal line. Any line that is in this angle, whether moving on top or falling, is called as an oblique line. Any angle it is there, it is called as an oblique line. While a vertical line can express a state of equilibrium with force of gravity, symbolize a human condition or mark a position in space, a horizontal line can represent stability, the ground plane, the horizon, or a body at rest. An oblique line is a deviation from the vertical or horizontal. It may be seen as a vertical line falling or a horizontal line rising. In either case, whether it's falling towards a point on the ground plane or rising to the sky, to a place in the sky, it is dynamic. So the same concept of static and dynamic comes into play here. So the Seagram building by Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson. Just remember always, either rent buildings are very important buildings that is in NATA paper. Seagram building is by Mies van der. Crown Hall in Chicago, Illinois Institute of Technology is by Mies van der. So he is in the early 19th century who did a lot of skyscrapers back then. This is the example of line elements now, because when you look at the image, you can feel the strong sense of vertical lines and horizontal lines. So that's why this is a perfect example of line. Okay. Now coming to plane, a line extended in a direction other than its intrinsic direction becomes a plane. A plane has a length, width, but no depth. It only has an x and y, and it doesn't have a z value, is what they're trying to say. So it forms shapes. Primary identifying characteristic of a plane is what shape is the plane in, whether it's a square, whether it's a rectangle, or whether it's a circle, or whether it's a triangle. True shape of a plane only when it's viewed on a frontal. So if on the cube, if you open up a cube, these are the number of when you open up a cube, these are the number of surface planes you'll get. It's just not four-sided. A cube is just not four-sided. You will have to consider all the sides. So cube le itna planes now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planes. So this is a question that also comes up in terms of orthographic projection. So they'll give you images of different volumetric projections and ask you to count the number of surfaces. So when you count the number of surfaces, you will have to count what the bottom hidden surface, the rear surface. Every surface that is also hidden to the eye should be counted. And the composition of a visual construction, a plane surface defines the limits or boundaries of a volume. If architecture as a visual art deals specifically with the formation of three-dimensional volumes of mass and space, then the plane should be regarded as a key element in the vocabulary of architectural design. The supplementary properties of a plane, its surface, color, pattern, and texture affect its visual weight and stability. Now, in architectural language, we will split the planes as an overhead plane, that's the ceiling plane, the wall plane, and then the floor plane, the base plane. Okay, that's the general distinguishing of the planes in a general context, in architectural context. Now, planar elements, the best example is Robbie House or Falling Waters by Frank Lloyd Wright. Again, you guys will have to remember Frank Lloyd Wright, the name, because he's called as the father of modern architecture. And he is an architect who explores a lot on planar elements. So if you look at his Robbie House and his Falling Waters house that is designed by him, both are a beautiful example of planar exploration. He juxtaposes the planes at different levels and creates the form. So that's one case of a flat planar element, how it is placed. This is a case of a curved one. The lamella structure expresses the way forces are resolved and channeled down to roof supports. This is a different example of a plane. And this is a common thing that we see every day, like not every day. Good buildings, form explorations are done in this aspect. Now coming to volume, a plane extended in a direction other. So a line extended other than its intrinsic direction forms a plane. Now a plane extended in a direction other than its intrinsic direction becomes a volume. Conceptually, a volume has three dimensions: length, width, and depth. I think plane or the area calculation and volumes or the calculation, you guys would have explored already in school in your maths as to what are the different factors involved in calculating. So volumetric example, one beautiful example is this Notre Dame Chapel by Le Corbusier, Notre Dame du Havre. This is a church. So if you look at this particular region, obviously will have a lot of dead space. So before I forget, you guys, during your architecture course or right now, if you have the time, I'm going to type on the chat box, you will have to buy this book called, if there's an online version also available, D.K. Ching, Form, Space, and Order. This book tells you all the abstract concepts and all the concepts of principles of design is covered in this. So all these symmetry, asymmetry, balance, form follows function, function follows form in the Madri. A lot of these abstract concepts that you will be using in architecture, that you will be always, even after like 5 years during your design practice also. This is a very important book because we all keep referring, not exactly referring, connecting back to the concepts explained in this book. There is a online PDF available also. So buy, like open this PDF online, or you can buy this book. It is a very useful book. So now coming back to this concept here. So in the chapel, it is a form exploration. So Le Corbusier, the architect, has beautifully explored the form. Like usually church, now Gothic churches, Roman churches, there's a certain style of church, but he's broken away from the usual style and volumetrically explored how you can differently do it. And rather than doing just a cuboid, he's extruded it in a very different form. So these are volumetric explorations. Now, coming to his own example, there is this Villa survey is again by De Corbusier, a very beautiful cubic example. So, he is somebody who explores on cubism. So, this is an example of a very nice villa in France, very cubic and a cylinder at the in the center. So, one thing that if a volume and a base knowledge, we all assume volumes are supposed to be a closed one, either a cuboid or a sphere. A volume can also be an open mass. Like here in the plaza, already we've seen it as an example of point element, where the statue is a point element. But this entire space is a beautiful open volume. So how is this open volume being composed? The open volume is composed because of the buildings alongside. The complex of buildings around gives it the volume, gives a good volumetric space in the center, an open volumetric space. So now, before we move on to principles of design, what I want you guys to do is, like how you did for point, I want you to write down two examples of line elements. I will tell you examples. I don't want you guys to repeat. For example, the pedestrian lines, the lamppost, all become line elements. Okay. Now, planar elements, your landscape in your house, your garden in the garden strip in the house, your sunshade in the house becomes planar elements. Volumetric element, your staircase is a volume. So these are examples of how you can connect to what is a volume, what is a plane, and what is a line. So we've already finished points. So now take 10 minutes and write not just your house, you can talk about your neighborhood level also. So in the park, what you identify as line, plane, and volume, you can talk about it. So the pond becomes a planar, either, or you can also call it the fountain becomes the volumetric aspect. So you can define it in what context you are saying. So I wanted to write down two examples of line, two examples of plane, and two examples of volume. And all of you will have to write it for me to start the next one. It's not like only 2 or 3 people will answer. There are 14 of you. I will have to have answers 14 into 14 of you will give me 2 options in each. Okay. So one person will be giving me 6 options of line, plane, and volume that you see in your regular, in your day-to-day context. Okay, I'll give you 10 to 15 minutes. Do you guys want 10 minutes or 15 minutes? I think 10 minutes is fine. You're just going to write it down. So 4:30, 4:40, I want you all to just start putting up on the chat box. Irrespective of if I'm turning up or not, I will turn back at 4:40 definitely. So as soon as you finish the whole list, I want you to start putting it up here. Okay. Yes. See you guys in 10 minutes. Yes, guys, are you all back? I see only 13 people, that means 11 people. So did you all try attempting? So let's not waste time. Quickly put it up on the chat box and then we move forward to the next topic. Yes, quickly. Quick, quick, quick. What happened to all those people who asked fourth topic? We have to start, no? Quick, quick. Shalini, Harita, Rahul, Kartika, where are you guys? Only if you put this, I will start the element principles of design. Kili Valavan has put point, column, pillars, fans, corners, clock, line, table, door, rack, photo frame, horizontal line, plain table, top view of the table, front view of the door, mobile without it. Good one. Volume, refrigerator, container, empty space, three-dimensional enclosure occupied by any material. Good one. He sent it to me directly. I'm going to copy it and put it common one. Good one, yeah. Priyadarshini, yes. Line, scale, pencil. Apart from that, the others. What about plain, volume, Priyadarshini? Guys, this is not fair at all. You guys won't turn on your videos. You guys won't turn on your volume to talk and don't want to put it up. How am I supposed to take this class? Clean window cupboard with once. Quickly put it up on the chat box. Around 15, more than 15 minutes you've been doing this. Actually, I said 10 minutes. I came back after 15, I think 20 minutes probably. And send it to everyone on the meeting. Okay, if you have done it, it's going to be useful for you. If you haven't done it and you've been lazing around, it's your loss. Okay. Okay, fine. Let us start for those two people who have made an effort and typed on the chat box. Good, keep them. Because you will realize all this value when you go into college. Shalini has put up line. Road in Google Map, tube light, pipelines, good one. Plane is mirror, airplane runway, a cantilever, volume. 90s monochromatic TV. Why today's TV is more planar? Yes. 90s TVs are more volumetric. Statue, a group. Yes. Good one, Shalini. She sent it again to me as direct message. Let me copy and put it to everyone. Hari has written Montes mattress, wardrobe, plain, roof, door, line, volumetric, tank, cardboard box. Okay, guys. Okay, I'm glad about the 4 or 5 people who attempted. The others, let's just give up hope on the others, and I'm going to open principles of design. So, share screen. Share. So, இப்போ நான் cover பண்ண போற 8 principles விட there are a lot of other options that come in your paper. To be very conscious in the thing because I might be touching upon with 1 or 2 points in the course of this discussion. The principles of design are a set of rules that designers can follow when creating a composition to create a visually pleasing work. The purpose of these rules is to deliver a message in the most organized and functional way. So, in the presentation, that is this presentation will be sent to you guys. What we will be discussing is proportion, balance, scale, axis, rhythm, harmony, repetition, and contrast. So some of these concepts are very interlinked and interchanged and used. For example, proportion and scale can be interchanged and used. Some people can refer to it as proportion, some people can refer to it as scale. So the person who's setting up your question paper will be very clear if they're actually attacking the point of scale or proportion. But then somewhere you will have a confusion when you're looking at the composition, whether it is a proportion or it is a scale. So I will just guide you as to how you can actually distinguish a proportion and distinguish a scale. That's one example where a lot of intermixing happens. Then we will be talking about rhythm, harmony, and repetition, which is again a confusing one. So coming to proportion, what is a proportion? In a general English vocabulary way, proportion is the ratio when you're relating one object to another. When you're relating one object to another and talking about the ratio. For example, you decide to put up a blackboard in your wall. Okay. So if you're going to the shop to buy a blackboard, obviously in your mind you will be proportionating the wall and the board size. You will not buy a board that is too big for that wall. So what is the intention? How much is it a personal board that you're going to put up, or is it a teaching board that few students have to see? Where are the students going to sit? How big the board should be? All that comes into play while you're thinking of buying something in terms of proportion. Proportion is something that we use in everyday life as to how to arrange your books. You will arrange in a certain proportion. How to arrange your living room, again, that is a certain proportion that comes into play. The proportion is something between different things or parts with respect to comparative size, number, or degree. A part considered with respect to the whole. The interrelationship of all parts of an arrangement. The proportion on the in general, this is a graphical proportion. Now we're going to be looking at a real life scenario of a structural proportion. So what is the structure? Structure is columns and beams. Today we talk about the structure of a building. There's columns and beams because they are the main structural things that make the building stand. So structural proportion is another. The particular building itself can stand. So you cannot have a column of 5 feet by 6 feet and a beam of 1 feet. There has to be a certain proportion. So how is the column size and how is the beam size decided is based on the load that the building carries, the size, the span of the building. Who decides the size of the column and size of the beam is the structural engineer, not the architect. So the architect designs the form, comes up with the form and sends it to the structural engineer's office, and they come back to us with a certain structural proportional ratio, either a particular structural drawing saying that we can introduce a column here, we can introduce a beam here, and it goes into the space. So we work whether this will work or not, and then we send it back to the structural engineer's office that these things will work or these things we need a revision of. So it's a front and back work. So the architect is the supreme person who is in charge of the entire building making. So the structural engineer, the civil engineer, the plumbing consultant, all of these people are subsidiary consultants who need to listen to the architect. So I'm just trying to establish the hierarchy in the hierarchical ratio. The architect is the supreme most important person who is involved in the making of the design. Okay. Structural members are designed to transmit the load through vertical supports to the foundation. The column size depends on the span and beam depth depends on the column size and the span. More the span, beam depth increases, otherwise the structure will collapse. Now that is about structural proportion. Now coming to manufactured proportions, here we are talking about the accessories that we use in making products, especially in the case of products. So here in the case of windows, how are we putting the hinges? Is it a top hinge, bottom hinge, side hinge, or pivoted? Or if in the case of this TV unit, how exactly are you? What is the ratio of the hinge that you will buy? Based on the size of the unit that you are dealing with, you will buy these accessories. So these are the cases of manufactured proportions. Many architectural elements not only depends on the structural proportion, or it also depends on the function. It depends on the manufacturing process as they are produced as a bulk product. Now coming to balance, we see balance in everyday life. Balance is something proper. Static balance is something we always look for in any sort of arrangement. So for instance, you take a dining table, the way the plates and the cutlery are arranged, we tend to look for a balance that four plates circa or 2 plates circa. So this is the common balance that we try to see, the common order. Okay. So in balance, a balance appears secure and stable. Balance must be both visual and actual. Visual balance refers to the way an arrangement appears to the eye. A balance can be symmetrical and asymmetrical also. So now the example that they've given here is the mandala art and a different form of art here for an asymmetrical balance. So mandala art has been in trend for some 2-3 years now. I'm sure all of you know what's a mandala art. So symmetrical balance in now, you cut the particular piece of art or particular building or anything with a axis, an imaginary axis. They should be symmetrical on either sides, right? They should be a mirror image. So if a mandala art, any direction that you section it, it will be the same on both sides. They're like a reflection on both sides. That's an example of a beautiful example of a symmetrical balance. Now, a very common example of a symmetrical balance is the column that we all do in our traditional South Indian households. The dot and line column, the point and line column that we do is based on geometry. Is again an example of symmetrical balance, not the rangoli. The rangoli becomes an example of an asymmetrical balance because you draw peacocks, you draw flowers. Obviously, they are not supposed, they won't fall under a category of a symmetrical balance. Now coming to symmetrical balance is the balanced distribution and arrangement of equivalent forms and spaces on opposite sides of a dividing line or plane or about a center or axis. Symmetry is one of the modes of orderliness. Symmetry arouses a visual stability, a visual static sense, or a stability you can call. So if it is static or a principle, they can give it to you as stability or orderliness or pattern. So ஒரே idea வந்து they can use 3 different vocabulary meanings to it. Okay? A symmetrical object is better organized and retained in memory. An axis can exist without symmetry, but a symmetrical condition cannot exist without axis and center about which it is structured. So the last sentence or a meaning in the noun. So anything where you try to find a symmetry is with the axis. The axis is always imaginary in the symmetrical case, a proper symmetrical one. For example, a very good example of a symmetrical building is Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal is always perceived as a nice building at a long distance. Basically, when you stand, you see a central water body going with 2 sides of landscape leading to the big plinth and where the monument is standing and has 4 minarets and a central dome. So along this water body, we are imagining an axis is running and you section the building, it will be equal on both. It's like a mirror image on both sides. So a beautiful example, a beautiful case of a symmetrical building is Taj Mahal, where an imaginary axis is existing. And always Taj Mahal is not perceived as a beautiful building. When you go stand very close to Taj Mahal, it's always at a distance. Yes, all the pictures that you see floating around is always at a distance. The Taj Mahal is covered, captured as a whole building. Okay. Now coming to scale. இப்போ நம்ம ஏற்கனவே proportion பார்த்தோம். Scale எங்க யூஸ் ஆகுதுன்னா we're going to be talking about a visual scale. Scale will establish a sense of hierarchy. So on the first image we saw butterflies of different sizes. So we obviously the biggest butterfly is the biggest one there and it is going in a certain order. A certain sense of hierarchy is already established in our mind. The principle of scale refers to the relative size of one object compared to another. Typically, the size of the artwork to the viewer's body. Scale can also refer to the size relationship of different visuals within a singular piece of art. Scale helps you understand your work. You can size different parts of your design to signal which parts are more important and which parts are less important. So where really the idea of scale is used is in the making of posters, flyers, logo. So if on a poster, a movie poster, whatever is the movie highlighting, whether it's a dark movie or whether it's a animated movie, you bring in those elements to the forefront and you put the rest in the background. You give more highlight, more value, more color, more thickness to the one that you're highlighting. So ange, the sense of hierarchy is established by using the scale as a tool. So here again in this example, if you see, there are 4 squares. We want to highlight this central square for some particular reason. So that's why you see the blue is more darker and the black is again more thicker and it slowly grades down. And again, the grading down is the size of the square as well. So scale creates an emphasis and drama. Now coming to axis. So I already spoke about axis and axis in the case of Taj Mahal. So where else do we see axis is in your school corridor, since all of you are just passing out of school and all of us have been to schools, and schools know the corridor is a common thing because you have to go from one classroom to the other. There is an established corridor. So the corridor is a sign of axis. So it tells you which direction to move. So again, in the case of malls, again, all shops are aligned and there is a central, there is a corridor running all around. So in the corridor movement, as to which direction you have to go, which direction you need to go past the car, and which direction you have to go to the next shop, all this is established by the axis, the movement in which you have to travel. So idellame is not there are no like physically a line is not drawn, but mentally we are able to map the directionality. That is the kind of axis, the way it gives us a sense of direction. So it's an imaginary line that organizes forms and organization in architecture. It's a line established by 2 points in space about which forms and space can be arranged in a regular or an irregular manner. It is a very powerful, a dominating, regulating device. It implies symmetry and demands a balance. So only when there's a sense of balance is there, we are able to sense the axis in that particular case or a context. So now I refer Taj Mahal as an example. Can you come up with another example of axis? I mean, like on the chat box, you can put it up. Another example of axis where you have felt a strong sense of directionality, strong sense of orientation, a strong sense of symmetry and all of that. Can you put it up on the chat box? You don't have to go and come. I'm not giving you like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I'm just put it up on the chat box now. Shopping malls, we just spoke about shopping malls. Some other case. Buckingham Palace, yes. The walkway, we actually go through a big park which leads you to the Buckingham Palace. So Karthika has mentioned about Buckingham Palace. The way you go towards that particular palace itself is done in a particular orientation, which again there's a strong sense of access. I think people who have been to Buckingham Palace can relate to it. So if you see the case of Delhi Rajpath, I think it comes in a lot of these Tamil movies, Hindi movies, and they cover Delhi itself. If you watch these very old movies like Maunaragam by Mani Ratnam in Tamil, he would have actually covered that entire Rajpath, that entire axis, the roadway that goes into the political arena, the main political buildings, which is there. So a big, it is established, India Gate is there, and then the Rashtrapati Bhavan is there. All of this, you will feel a strong sense of axis. Yes, that's one case. And if you take the exam, somebody has Vimana of Brihadishwara temple from a little far distance. So Shalini has said, please guys send this message to everyone and not a direct message to me. Vimana of Brihadishwara temple. So Brihadishwara temple itself has a very different qualities to talk about. I think here she's referring the Vimana as the Gopuram. The Gopuram has a very special feature that it never casts the shadow on the ground. Okay, be it any time of the day, be it at any angle, the Gopuram will never cast a shadow. It has been constructed, the calculation, the orientation has been done in such a very mysterious way, we can also call it, because we are never able to recreate that case anywhere else. So it's a very special feature that is being done in the case of Brihadishwara temple. That's also a good example of a vertical axis. You sort of gradually grow in the vertical axis. So I was actually going to mention about axis doesn't always have to be a horizontal axis. There can also be a vertical axis. For example, all these skyscrapers we see today. especially the UAE countries, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the Al Burj, all of this has a sense of vertical axis. So that was a good one by the last person who is a Shalini. Okay, now coming to we finished axis. So these are examples in urban scape, the entrance axis is allowed. Now, rhythm, harmony, and repetition part of the body. We will see what is repetition to understand what is rhythm and harmony. So repetition by the vocabulary meaning of it itself is repeat. You're going to repeat one element continuously. So you can either repeat circles, or you can either repeat lines, or you can either planes. So that's the example that's given below. Repetition is repeating a single element throughout the design. We can call a grid a repetition of lines because it creates a certain consistency. The same folio placement creates continuity in the repetition. So repetition is the reusing of the same or similar elements throughout the design. We use repetition to create a sense of unity and consistency throughout a design. Repetition creates a particular style, creates cohesiveness, creates emphasis, hierarchy, structure, and strengthens a design. So in repetition, mostly it's in the case of elevation design. So elevation design, it's the front facade of the building. So I think commonly when you travel, when you go in the road, you will be looking at the elevation quality of a building. So you will sort of connect how a particular pattern is repeated. That is the idea of repetition. A repetition is in the architecture language that way. The last image you see here is a case of a normal 2D composition repetition with either colors or with either shapes. I think I will need a 5-minute break to just go grab some water and come. So 5:15, be back. We will just have 15 more minutes left, and I will cover what is a rhythm and a harmony. I just need some water. I'll just come back. Guys, where did everybody vanish? I really needed some water, so I went. There are only 4 people left here. So I think in that case, we'll wind up. You know, Harita, Rahul, Kartika, 1, 2, 3, 4. Harmony, rhythm, and repetition are very important things for you guys to like listen. So we'll do it in the next class. It's tomorrow's class when you guys are there. I think Trichy batch I'm going to be taking, so we'll do it tomorrow. Please don't keep vanishing like this because we were 20 in the beginning. I don't know if it was. I will have to talk to Aarti ma'am about this. We'll see. So we'll wind up. We will see in tomorrow's class. Okay, about these 3 topics. I didn't expect people to vanish away so quickly. Okay, guys, it's fine. These 4 people, we'll continue this tomorrow. Okay.